Hey people, I'd like to thank Professor Black Truth for because he reminded me of this in one of his videos, which was I think the baby boomers, aka Generation Fail. Anyway, let's go on. This is about the real Lone Ranger, and this is from the historychannel.com. Was the real Lone Ranger a black man? The amazing true story of Bass Reeves, the freed slave who protected the Wild West, by Tad Morgan. On a riverbank in Texas, a master of disguise waited patiently with his accomplice, hoping that his target, an infamous horse thief, would show himself on the trail. After 4 days, the hunch paid off. When the bandit unwittingly walked towards the man who haunted the outlaws of the Old West. Springing from the bushes, the cowboy confronted his frightened mark with a warrant. As the desperado reached for his weapon, as a last-ditch effort, the lawman shot him down before his gun could leave his side. Though the quick-draw tale may sound like an adventure of the Lone Ranger, this was no fictional event. In fact, it was one of the many feats of Bass Reeves, a legendary lawman of the Wild West, a man whose true adventures rivaled those of the outlaw wrangling masked character. Reeves was a real-life African-American cowboy who, one historian has proposed, may have inspired the Lone Ranger. In 1838, nearly a century before the Lone Ranger was introduced to the public, Bass Reeves was born a slave in the Arkansas household of William S. Reeves, who relocated to Paris, Texas in 1846. It was in Texas during the Civil War that Williams made Bass accompany his son George Reeves to fight for the Confederacy. While serving George, Bass escaped to Indian Territory under the cover of the night. The Indian Territory, now known today as Oklahoma, was a region ruled by 5 Native American tribes: Cherokee, Seminole, Creek, Choctaw, and Chickasaw, who were forced from their homelands due to the Indian Removal Act of 1830. While the community was governed through a system of tribal courts, the court's jurisdiction only extended to members of the 5 major tribes. That meant anyone who wasn't part of these tribes, from escaped slaves to petty criminals, could only be pursued on a federal level within its boundaries. It was against the backdrop of the lawless Old West that Bass would earn his formidable reputation. Upon arriving in the Indian Territory, Bass learned the landscape and the customs of the Seminole and Creek tribes, even learning to speak their languages. After the 13th Amendment was passed in 1865 abolishing slavery, Bass, now formerly a freed man, returned to Arkansas where he married and went on to have 11 children. After a decade of freedom, Bass returned to the Indian Territory when U.S. Marshal James Fagan recruited him to help rein in the criminals that plagued the land. Fagan, under the direction of federal judge Isaac C. Parker, brought in 200 deputy marshals to calm the growing chaos throughout the West. The deputy marshals were tasked with bringing in the countless thieves, murderers, and fugitives who had overrun the expansive 75,000 square mile territory. White-on-white crime was at its finest. Able local shooters and trackers were sought out for the position, and Bass was one of the few African Americans recruited. Standing at 6 feet 2 inches, with proficient shooting skills from his time in the Civil War and his knowledge of the terrain and language, Bass was the perfect man for the challenge. Upon taking the job, he became the first black deputy U.S. Marshal west of the Mississippi. As deputy marshal, Bass is said to arrest more than 3,000 people and killed 4,000 outlaws, all without sustaining a single gun wound, writes biographer R.T. Burton, who first asserted the theory that Bass inspired the Lone Ranger in his 2006 book, Black Gun, Silver Star, The Life and Legend of Frontier Marshal Bass Reeves. At heart of Burns' argument is the fact that over 32 years as deputy marshal, Bass found himself in numerous stranger-than-fiction encounters. Also, many of the fugitives Bass arrested sent to the Detroit House of Corrections, in the same city where the Lone Ranger would be introduced to the world on the radio station in WXYZ on January 30th, 1933. In addition to his wide-ranging repertoire of skills, Bass took a creative approach to his investigations, sometimes disguising himself or creating new backstories in order to get a jump on his targets. One such pilot required Bass to walk nearly 30 miles dressed as a beggar on the run from authority. Where he arrived at the home of his target's 2 brothers, the mother invited Bass in and suggested that he stay the night. Bass accepted her offer, and the 2 sons were in handcuffs before sunrise. After restraining the siblings in their sleep, Bass walked them the entire way back to his camp. Much like his silver screen equivalent, Bass was fiercely dedicated to his position. Widely considered impossible to pay off or shake up, Bass demonstrated a moral compass that could put even Superman to shame. He went so far as to arrest his own son, Benny, for murdering his wife. In Bass's obituary in the January 18, 1910 edition of the Daily Admirate, it was reported that Bass had overheard a marshal suggesting that another deputy take on the case. Bass stepped in quietly, saying, "Give me the writ." He arrested his son, who was sentenced to life in prison. The legendary lawman was eventually removed from his position in 1907 when Oklahoma gained statehood. As an African American, Bass was able to continue in his position as deputy marshal under new state laws. He died 3 years later after being diagnosed with Bright's disease, but the legend of his work in the Old West would live on. Although there is no concrete evidence that the real legend inspired the creation of one of fiction's most well-known cowboys, Bass Reeves is the closest real person to resemble the fictional Lone Ranger on the American western frontier of the 19th century, Burton writes in Black Girl and Silver Star. However, Bass accomplished things that dwarf the triumphs of his fictional counterpart in his journey from slave to one of the staunchest defenders of the very government that had failed to protect his freedom in the first place. And while the truth about the Lone Ranger may remain a mystery, the story of Bud Reeves remains an inspiration for real-life heroes to this day. So, I always say we should remember these actual heroes and not let people whitewash the history, because, as Professor Black-Drew was saying, they'll take anything that was heroic and done by a black man and make a white man do it. I mean, they do this to this day. I remember seeing a story where apparently there was a film about 9/11, and there was a Marine who said he rescued someone. In real life, this guy was a black man, but when they put him in the film, they made him into a white guy. Oh yeah, the hate is real. Anyway, let's not go on so long. So please comment, rate, share, and subscribe. If you want to support this channel, leave the PayPal in the description. I'll leave my Instagram there too, so you can find me on Instagram. Peace, family.